Okay, Mehtab, you think more operators should be cutting benefits, cutting their employees' benefits? This is like a thing that people are not doing enough. Is this really where you're going to start this conversation? Are you the cut benefits guy now?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds horrible, but I think it's, I think there's a lot of win-win in it where employees sometimes, I think most of the time they would just prefer cash and they'd split the savings with you.
Is there a specific pathway to cutting benefits that accomplishes that? Like, where are people overpaying for benefits? Because if you say it as cutting benefits, it sounds bad. If you say it as giving employees more cash, it sounds pretty good. And how is that a savings split, et cetera?
Yeah, good question. So maybe a great example we could walk through is one of our companies that's currently set up in Mexico. We have about 120 people there on the manufacturing side. When we moved there, we were told by the senior management team that you need to have a transport benefit, which is where a bus picks up everyone and drops them off at work. And that was running us, I want to say close to $30,000 per month in just that transport benefit. So I thought, why not just ask the team and see if they actually care about that? So we ran a quick poll, as in literally just asked everyone there, like, hey, would you rather have X amount more dollars on each paycheck, or would you rather have this transportation benefit? And I want to say 95% of the people opted for the cash in their pocket. Now, this can kind of hurt yourself if you're looking at higher level roles where freeing up someone's time is really, really important so they can think more about their work, if that makes sense. So if you had an employee that's $200,000 a year, it's okay to give them more of these benefits so that they're not thinking about specific things, if that makes sense. But if it's something like production work where they're very on and off, I think that's where this really makes a lot of sense. That's where we found the biggest, most consistent wins.
So how much did you save per month by doing that?
I think we saved 15, 20,000-ish per month.
Jeez. And then people who wanted that benefit could just pay for it, and they had enough money to do it?
Yeah, they just sorted out some other form of transportation.
Yeah. It's a good illustration of like how some of these, like, it's almost like a market principle. It's just like centralizing a benefit like that is not actually a very efficient way to give the benefit, because some people care about it, some people don't, some people would rather do other things, but then they're forced into this mechanism because it's the cost, whereas if you just put the money in their pocket and let them make a rational decision, like, they'll probably be better and you'll also save money.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of like a perfect illustration of how a market in some ways is actually a better example of this. That's a really big savings too. I mean, this is what I basically want to talk about for the next little while, is just like you and I both separately. And one of the reasons I've had you on a few times, at least twice before.
Yep.
I love our conversations. One of the things that you and I have both talked about a lot is how lean OpEx is a particular value in DTC. And I have a couple thoughts about that for how, that plays itself out. But I think almost nobody I've talked to who trumpets this value actually says it with the level of clarity to how to do it that you do. You talk about managing people in a way that is both good for their production in the company as well as saves money for the brand, with a level of clarity that I just don't know if I've ever heard anybody else do. Maybe just tell people really fast, so you at Carta Ventures, how many brands do you guys currently have either a minority or a majority position in? You guys invest in a bunch of different D2C brands.
Yeah, we actually closed the deal 2 months right after we did the podcast with you, because of you.
Nice.
So thank you.
Great.
And
how's it working out?
Good. And then we're just waiting on the signature for another deal today. It's actually just waiting on someone's mom to sign off. That's the last step. Which is kind of funny. This kind of thing always happens. It's not a big deal, but it's just funny to hear about. So there's about 8 companies, and I'd say of those, we're usually very active in anywhere from 3 to 5 at a time. Okay. Right now, that's closer to 4. So,
and when you do this is an area of the business that you guys take majority and minority positions as very active partners, helping brands just get more profitable as they grow. Yeah. You want to say a little more about like sort of how you engage with companies? I think it's pretty different than what other people do.
Yeah. So it really depends on the specific company and their situation. We've done everything from be really passive if that's what they want to extremely hands-on. So for Color, my co-founder, when we closed that deal because of your podcast, my co-founder flew out there for a week and he worked with them hand in hand on the ops side. And then he also met with them in China when they were working on rehauling their supply chain. So we can be really, really hands-on or hands-off if that's what someone wants. Like we have equity in a nootropic company that sells supplements, and we're pretty hands-off. The last thing we helped with was just mapping out the plan for setting up a UK-based production facility.
Yeah.
So he just asked us for help, so we just jumped in and helped to execute that. But it just varies by company. So I think that's what makes us a good partner is our flexibility. If you have, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and you also, I think, have real value to add as an investor. Like you understand D2C extremely well. You know, and so when you want to go in and get involved with the company and really help them sort things out, I think is an unbelievable deal for an operator who like has some good things about their business, but just like needs some help thinking about the like mechanics of the business side. Because you probably think with the most clarity about a lot of this stuff of anybody. I mean, when I've heard you talk about, a debt stack for a brand, for example, like you've got absolute clarity to what you're talking about in a way that just most people don't. It's just they got into the business because they wanted to do product and marketing, not because they wanted to understand their debt stack. And so somebody like you comes in is just like, really, really clear about that. And in this area of the business, the OpEx thing is, I think, another big deal. I'm so convinced that brands are spending too much money on their operations and not getting enough value out of their operations. I have a couple of things I like to think about with that. You are now watching this happen across a bunch of different businesses that you are actively in and actively helping do things like, this benefit kind of thing. So I wonder if we could just spend some time talking a little bit more about really specifically, how do you manage people well? And how do you do that in a way that is also shaves OpEx, et cetera? Like maybe let's just start at the start. Like what is the first thing brands should be doing that they maybe aren't as much as they should be, that is like the biggest lever here on the people management side, on the OpEx side to sort of start optimizing?
Yeah, I think the number one most obvious thing is to have really good hygiene and implementing best practices around management. So I think a lot of times you're into a brand that was doing 7 figures, maybe they've jumped up to 10, 20 million or something, and there's still no formalized review process. And the reason it's important isn't so it's like some super corporate formal thing. It's more so the employees feel it's really fair. Otherwise, you'll end up with a lot of attrition. And I think like a system like Scaling Up or EOS/Traction, that's the easiest thing to do because it forces you to implement a lot of hygiene and best practices. An example of that would be the GWC. Are you familiar with EOS at all?
I'm familiar with EOS. I'm familiar with both, basically. I've spent more time in EOS meetings, but I've never implemented either, precisely for the reason that you said, which is that I'm not building a very big thing. And so, but I just had a client start to implement EOS, and I was thrilled about this. If I could go back and do 4x400 over again, one of the things I would have done much earlier is implement EOS, actually. Because like, I've heard you frame it like this. People just don't, like, they just don't have a real management system and a real operational system, but it's a solved problem. Like, people have thought really hard about how to do this well. And you've mentioned Scaling Up, and EOS is 2 of them. So go back to what you're saying about EOS specifically.
Yeah, so there's a handful of tools I really like. The GWC is a great, I think we've all been there where we have someone on our team and we don't realize that they're maybe not pulling their weight. And then when we really think about it, you let them go and you're like, wow, they're truly doing nothing right. That's something EOS kind of slaps you in the face with because they have tools like a scorecard, which is just a set of KPIs by person that's being looked at on a weekly basis. And at the end of the day, everyone's goal is to improve a specific number, right? And what EOS really forces you to do is assign out a set of numbers or even just a number to each person. And they know that's something they're responsible for. And they won't be surprised if they're told things aren't going well because they know that the number they're responsible for has atrophied over time. So I really like that. And then the grading system they use, the 555 review system, as part of it, they have something called Get It, Want It, Capacity to Do It. And even just thinking about those 3 things, it's really nice because it simplifies it to the point where even an entry-level manager can apply that downstream with a lot of clarity. And again, it fosters a nice sense of fairness because no one really quits because, they're not, well, they do sometimes. They feel they're not getting paid enough or something like that. But really, they tend to quit because they feel something's not fair, right? So doing things like developing a really good compensation philosophy. There's a book by Vern Harnish who developed Scaling Up called Scaling Compensation. If you read that, you can build a beautiful comp philosophy out in maybe 15, 20 hours, including the time to read the book. And you'll have way less HR issues, like probably 60, 70%. And it'll give you a lot of clarity around who's the right fit and who's not the right fit.
why don't people do this? It's like when you say I can solve your HR issues, your comp philosophy. Comp philosophy is another perfect example of something where like people are paying people for no reason. Taylor's pointed out a lot of times that like one of the things he likes about agencies, for example, is that like internal employees float around aimlessly and nobody really knows. And so in that respect, agencies are cost savers. Like everybody sees the big price tag and they're like, oh my gosh, it's so expensive. But actually like so much bad performance is hidden in organizations because of these kinds of things. Like, so why don't people do it?
Yeah, I think I can speak for myself. So I actually was introduced to EOS when I was 22 or so through a COO that we had. And he was a really bad COO. So I just totally ignored it and left it alone for a while. And I think I got back into it when I was 25 or so. And I think a lot of people just feel it's maybe when you read it through the first time, you can feel like, oh, my company's not big enough for this, or I don't see how this applies to me, or, oh, we already do this. But I think what's beautiful about it is it forces hygiene in all of the basic areas. And that comes together to make you just way more healthy than you would be otherwise if you were missing even just one or two small pieces.
Yeah. Where do people start with that? Do they just go to?
I just buy the book. I just buy. If you just search up Traction by Gino Wickman, I would just buy the book. It's like $10 or something. Yeah. We don't use an implementer. We've always self-implemented. I feel like they're kind of pricey for what they are. They're $7,500 a day or $10,000 a day. But they just didn't make sense to us. So we've just been doing it ourselves for a long time now. Yeah. Six years, I guess.
Do you think in general people have a correct sense of what like good or bad looks like? Like you mentioned using a scorecard, with EOS, like, but how much of this do you think is just because people have a really hard, I mean, I guess the question is like, when you start implementing these things with a brand, do they actually, are they surprised by the results of some of these things? Like, in terms of which metric they're tied to and some of that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times people kind of wake up and they have a bit of an epiphany, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, oh, hey, we hired this guy to do X, and that number hasn't improved. It's only gone down. So it's like, well, you might as well get rid of him if the number is not really going the right way. I don't think you stand to lose much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you can discover really, really top performers and double down on them. Like our preference is always to run a really tight team and overpay them pretty aggressively. The reason for that is every time you introduce someone new on a team, you create more lines of communication and it becomes just disgusting and really hard to manage. I'm sure you've run into it, right? Like you go from like 4 people to 10 people and it's not like just a little bit harder to manage. It's like 10 times harder to manage because you look at all the new lines of communication you need and then you need layers. And every time you introduce a layer, it becomes so much more complicated to run a business.
Yeah. So the takeaway there is aggressively compensate really high quality people, basically.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you think that's true for like agencies as well? Like in terms of like,
we've run into a few really, really good agencies that I like a lot. I'm just trying to think of a few, like, who was it? I can never remember his name. I know his agency's name. Sorry, I know his name, but I don't know his agency's name. But anyways, a Crucial Point in Utah. We've used them for audits for 5+ years now, where those kind of come in and slap us around a bit. Or David Herman. Yep. I really like him on the paid side, where we'll just pay him once in a while to come in and kind of kick us around a bit. So I think agencies can add a lot of value, even if you are largely using internal teams. Like most of our brands are at the size where internal makes sense. But I think having someone at an agency kind of come in, and you can get a good feel for it if you talk to 3 or 4 agencies, right? You get a feel for who knows what they're talking about, who doesn't, what good looks like, what good does not look like, et cetera. And from there, can help you build expectations for your internal team, or even just paying them periodically to do an audit once a quarter. And they'll tell you if someone's doing a great job or not a great job.
Look, I just made the case for it, and I really mean it. More Staffing connects in some way to basically everything I am doing in business. I could not be where I am right now without them. I am deeply grateful for them. If you want to explore finding incredible talent at like manager and up levels in the Philippines, you should do it with my friends at More Staffing. Morestaffing.co/AF. High integrity, trustworthy people who are going to make your business better and put more money on the bottom line of your business while they do. Morestaffing.co/AF to get started hiring incredible talent in the Philippines with more staffing today. So you were going to say something else about sort of the philosophy around paying high achievers really, really well. But I cut you off. How do you aggressively compensate those people? You said it reduces lines of communication. Is there more to that philosophy?
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm sure you've seen this, especially as you've been in an agency business where it is a people business. It's not uncommon to find one person who really creates the value of four, which sounds absurd. You see it a lot with devs, I think, like 10x dev is completely a real thing. You see it a lot with sales guys, where it's not uncommon to see one sales guy outsell other people by a ratio of 5 or 10 to 1. And I think those people should be extremely aggressively compensated. And I think like you just stand to lose so much if they leave, and they add so much value to your business. And keep in mind, even if you could just hire 10 people to match their output, you're still stuck in managing 10 people instead of one, right?
Right. So there's actually a double
that's why we
cost,
believe. Yeah, exactly. We have one guy on our team at the floral company named Campbell, who I just like really, really love. He's a great example. Total beast. If you need something done, he just instantly great strategic mind as well. And he's someone who's been on the team, I think, for 3 or 4 years, maybe longer now. But I love him, and like, it's great having people like that you're really excited to work with. And personally, that's what gets Alex and I really excited, my co-founder, is when we get to work with really smart people that are just there, fully dialed in, they really care. It gets us excited. So we don't mind kind of comping aggressively.
I think this is a mistake people make, especially in the lean OpEx conversation. Like lean OpEx can sound like a way of saying be cheap, and it's not really that. I think there's I mean, the example I've used for this, and I mean, I think this came from Taylor initially, but is like, and this is, I think in general with the agency versus in-house conversation, this comes up, it comes up in a few different places. But the example I've thought of is like I'm a big baseball fan. The Los Angeles Dodgers in the last year agreed to a contract with Shohei Ohtani for $700 million, and they are, that happened before last year. And they're now considering paying Juan Soto, one of the other best players in baseball. They're like apparently actively pursuing him, probably $600 million over a very long contract. And people look at that and go like, how can a team afford that much? And what the data said was that basically Ohtani's presence on the team made it so that they like not only won the World Series, but they smashed all of their financial forecasts for the year. That like even their forecasts with Ohtani, who's the most marketable star in the world in baseball, did that. And now they're like, okay, well, actually we made so much more money on him than we thought that we could actually consider also adding another player like this. And if you're not a baseball fan, it doesn't matter. The same principle, I think, actually does play in, which is that like Shohei Ohtani is maybe the best baseball player of all time in one way of looking at it. Like, and so, that's a super extreme example. But I think part of the point is it's extremely hard to pay that person too much money. And somebody else, there's so much demand for their services that somebody else is going to pay them a huge amount of money. And so you cannot try to nickel and dime it or just see it as a cost. You have to see it as a value center. When you get
they raise the floor. They raise the floor for your whole organization, right?
Yes, that's right.
Even if they're not in a related department, when say your COO meets your CMO and he's like, "Whoa, the CMO is brilliant," it just gets him really excited and raises the floor. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think people make this mistake a lot. They just see the cost. They just see the amount going out on the check, and it's a real problem. What about doing that internationally? Like how you and I have both talked about international. More Staffing is one of my sponsors for this episode. My staffing agency in the Philippines. I'm going to the Philippines in January. I'm going to hang out with them. Cool. They're involved in every part of my business. All I think about with them all the time is how much more I should be using them in different ways, and how.
Are you going to eat a lot of Jollibees?
Well, actually, I live in LA, and there's a couple Jollibees around, so I've been to Jollibee before. But
there's one like three blocks from me here, so.
Yeah. We'll see. It's probably not my favorite place to eat, but I probably will eat there while I'm there. But one of the things I always say about More Staffing is, and this is partly their way of viewing the world too, is they specifically are not like a go find virtual assistants company. They're like a go find superstars. And in fact, the CEO of More Staffing is a superstar. She's this kind of person. She's been on my podcast a few times, Laura Guevara. She's a monster of a business person. And everybody I've met at their higher levels and their executive roles are like this. And of course, why wouldn't there be? There's 180 million people in the Philippines. Smart people attract smart people. And especially if you can pay at the top of the market there, you're going to attract the best quality talent. And so
Right.
it seems to me there's like a double arbitrage opportunity here where you can basically implement the principle that we just talked about, which is like pay smart people a lot of money, keep your team lean in terms of the total number. And then you can actually sort of double down on that internationally by finding those people in international places, in different countries, where you can actually go up market there even more aggressively because your dollar goes farther, basically. And then at the same time, it's still, meaningfully less expensive than hiring that same person in the US, and sort of the two strategies can really come together. I honest to goodness, do not understand why people do not aggressively do this if they're already a remote US-based company. I don't get it at all. It's just right there. So I don't know. I mean, how do you think about the role of offshoring in your businesses? Do you go do this really aggressively with brands? Do you go wipe out a bunch of US-based in-house people and go replace them with offshore people? Like, how aggressive are you about this?
Yeah, we've done it quite a bit. I'd say the only time it maybe doesn't make sense is for very, very high leverage roles where it doesn't really matter if I pay the person 30 grand a year or 300 grand a year, because they're going to create so much impact. Their actual compensation relative to that is low. So someone like, I don't know, a really good marketer, right? You'll kind of pay, it doesn't really matter where they are. You'll just pay whatever the ask is. But for other roles that are more commoditized, or like back end roles, or like a lot of our supply chain team, for example, for one of our companies is based out of India and South America. I like South America because of the overlap with time zones, but yeah, like we've had a good experience with the Philippines, India, et cetera. It just depends on the specific company. Like this one actually builds product in India, and we have like a 60-person operation in India. So that's why we have our supply chain team there. It just makes sense. But to your point, I don't really see the point of having people US based and remote unless it's an extremely high leverage position where that comp doesn't really matter too much.
Yeah. Yeah. You've talked about this before, but like even Canada, right, is like 20 to how much % cheaper than the US?
Yeah, I think our dollar is 30% cheaper right now. And then on top of that, there's just not as many jobs here. Like we actually have one of the worst ratios of housing prices to income in the world. And it's like, that's kind of partially why. So if you want good talent that is essentially Americans, I mean, culturally, it's the same thing, more or less. Just, I say bag, which you guys will make fun of. But other than that, there's not too much, and it's 30% less. So
were you trying to say bag? Is that the word you're
Yeah. My wife makes fun of me because she's American, so I just had to bring it up.
And because she's your wife, so
yeah,
right. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. Do you? Yeah, I mean, I think the time zone thing is helpful. That's one of the harder things about the Philippines for sure. But I mean, increasingly too, most places there's like English speaking is really good. Like, I know in the Philippines, like every kid grows up speaking English basically from a very young age. Like, yeah. And one thing I've liked about the Philippines specifically actually is supply chain as well. You mentioned India probably has a similar value, but like Manila is like an hour and a half flight from like, core manufacturing cities in China. And so I've been working, this is like a newer thing, but I've been working with that team on some supply chain stuff, and they're just like they went to Canton Fair and they did it all, and it was easy for them, and they do it so much that they know they're around the places now and have more relationships. And so some of those things. So that I think is a side of the business in particular where it makes all the sense in the world to do that. Usually you also don't need to be for supply chain stuff. Usually you don't need to be communicating instantly. So like if there's differences in time zones, it's not a really big deal. Like somebody can send a Slack and look at it the next day and it's fine. If you're not having people work great.
Yeah. And whatever. The Philippines is actually really good for finance roles because they were on US GAAP until 2007. So if you want to hire someone in finance with familiarity with the US GAAP side, I would look there first, and I'd look for someone just a little bit older because they will have been trained in that. So
yeah, that's interesting too, because you mentioned this as a general place that people don't think about, which is like bookkeeping, accounting, like companies that are too small for a CFO, but they need some help. Like, you think Philippines is a good place to look specifically for that?
Oh yeah, we've had really good experiences with the Philippines. We actually have someone on our team. She's been with us since 2018 or 19, and she does. She kind of keeps the books up to date, but then she also runs a lot of BI projects. So if there's something disgusting involving 37 Excel sheets and you have to be 300 IQ and doing more than just like VLOOKUP and pivot tables, I give it to her and she's super stoked and like crushes it. And she's great to work with. So we have a few, we basically try to hire that kind of role at each company. I'd say it's a good fit for anyone doing it depends if you're manufacturing in-house or not, because that creates a lot of complexity on the financial side and depends on what your supply chain looks like, et cetera. But anywhere from like 8 to 15 million a year, I'd probably hire that role and I'd do it offshore, and I would have them split their time between bookkeeping, getting you really, really good reporting on the financial side, and making sure it is, like a lot of people don't run on accrual, which is like, all right, well, what's the point of having books then?
Right.
So
Right.
like just making sure you have everything properly set up, a good 13-week cash flow model, and then someone who can just tackle the really chunky BI projects that are sitting around. It just saves so much time. So
yeah. Okay, so attracting that talent. So we've talked about how you think about different layers of talent. Generally, go for high-end talent, where they can do the job of 5 to 10 people in massively influential roles, pay them what they're worth, run leaner, eliminate sort of mid-level talent in the midst of that. Yeah. Okay. And then evaluate people with a true actual management process like EOS or scaling up, right? One of those things. This makes a lot of sense. Okay, what about hiring those people? How do you find good people? Because this is an area where like I suck. Like just like how do you evaluate good talent, and how do you actually think about a hiring mechanism that makes sense?
Yeah, so I've spent way too much time on this. It's a thing I've been most grindy with for all of our portfolio companies. I'm the monkey that handles the building out like the hiring systems and like legal work, and then the credit side too. Usually those are my three. Oh, and revenue in general. But so for this, we have a preferred tech stack. I'm not saying it's the best, but our favorite thing to do is kind of hack. You're familiar with LinkedIn, right? And how you have to usually pay for a post. So we use Jazz HR. You can use any other ATS. Usually they have a partnership with LinkedIn where you can post unlimited ads for free and then get unlimited applicants for free. So if you do that, Jazz HR is like $100 or $300 a month or something like that. And it also, the software is really good just for screening. And it'll let you post across multiple places. So what we'll do typically is we'll create a role. Let's say I'm hiring a media buyer, right? I'll post a role for a senior media buyer, a junior media buyer, and then I might also post a role with like just a similar name, like digital marketing manager or something. And that way you get more ads up and more SEO. You can think of it as SEO almost, right? When people are searching, and they might not feel comfortable applying for a senior role, but they actually kind of do have a senior skill set, or you might find someone junior who's like just totally exceptional. So that's why we open it up across seniority levels and just lets you 10x the amount of applicants you get. Using something like Jazz HR, you can post on Indeed at the same time, LinkedIn, pretty much all the boards you can think of. And that's been really, really huge for us in general. It's also way faster to evaluate the talent because you can set up an automated quiz. So we just have basic ones like, how much were you spending across which channels before? What kind of reporting did you have set up? What kind of software were you using? If you give a really amateur answer about reporting, it's pretty easy to tell like that person can be skipped out on, right? Yeah.
So you're getting how many applicants, you said, in some of these jobs?
Yeah, so like for a media buyer one, since we just ran a process for this one, usually anywhere from 300 to 500 applicants in the first week is kind of a good target, I think.
And okay, that sounds, so you kind of glossed over this though. So you said you also use a quiz to evaluate these people.
Just a basic skills test. Nothing crazy. It would literally take someone like you 45 seconds.
With that basic skills test, how do you though sort through the answers? Like, are these are not open-ended questions?
Some of them are open-ended, and we just have a person on our team who goes through. She's based offshore, and she literally just goes through everything. We tell her what we're looking for, what we're not looking for, what's good, what's bad, and she has a pretty good feel for it now. So it's relatively.
She reads 400 media buyer applications.
Yeah, I'd say of those, like 300 might be auto-rejected because they put in, like there are some questions that are called, I forget what they're called in Jazz HR, but on Indeed they're called deal breaker questions. And those will automatically reject, if that makes sense. So it's really just going through 300. And then we make sure the questions, I should have mentioned this, but we make sure the questions that are really important to us are further up top. So she's not scrolling through the whole thing and reading and then being like, oh, oops, she'll read through like maybe the first question and can get to a no really fast.
That's smart. If you found this content helpful for growing your business, I promise you will find most of my content helpful for growing your business, which means you should subscribe. That's really smart, thinking about how the back end of that process is going to work when you set up the questions so that you can save some time, because that could actually be a huge time difference.
Totally.
You've also mentioned, I've seen you say this in a few places, that just generally people just don't have a method for evaluating talent in their hiring in general, right? Like they're sort of making up how they hire people. Like, how should people think about that instead?
Yeah, we use the process. Have you ever read Who by Brad Smart?
No.
So it's a really poorly written book with probably 60-70%. I was just talking to the the Epic Gardening guy, Kevin.
Yeah.
I was just talking to him about Who, because we had both read it, and it was like, that book is probably a 60% filler just to make, I don't know, whatever the publisher wanted work. But it's really good. I know Roman really loves that book as well, from Peak 21.
Yeah.
And that is literally the hiring process that we use. It spells out in detail, but it's basically a set of interviews, and it teaches you how to conduct them. And really, the big thing is going after specific references and telling the applicant which references you want. So I wouldn't say, give me 3 references. I would look at the resume and I'd say, I want to talk to this manager, that manager, and that manager. And if they can't get your references there, that's a bit of a deal breaker, because it is really a bad sign most of the time, right? There's rarely a good excuse for it.
That's extremely smart. I've always wondered about this with references, that it just seems so dumb. The whole idea of like you provide the references is such a strange idea. Like, because
and we've had some shocking results this way. Like we had someone interviewing for a senior operations role. So they'd probably be making like 180 to 220-ish base. And one of the references that we spoke to literally told us the person was an alcoholic and didn't show up to work on time at all. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect that. So
the person was not what?
They were an alcoholic and they weren't showing up to work like on time. They had major issues, etc. And then another person ended up confirming it. So we had asked specifically for those references, but I'm glad we did, because the reference check thing really does work if you're the one asking for the specific roles. Like that way you can't cherry pick.
Yeah, that seems like if you literally just did that from this episode, that would probably really help you when you hire, right? Like that makes totally sense.
And that book has a really good detailed process for doing it. Again, it's just kind of a really horrible read, way too fat a book, but
yeah,
it works. Yeah.
One of the things I hear from you a lot is like, there's just a lot of these things that I think of as problems, like I said, solved problems, like something that somebody else has already thought hard about. And what companies end up doing a lot of times is they're basically making up all of these things. They're just like, wait a minute, why don't we create we got to start hiring people. So I guess I know how this works. Like I write a job description, and then I have a conversation with them, and I read answer, and they're making every single stage of that up. They're just like, sure, we'll try that. And as if this process hasn't been thought about hard by somebody somewhere, in the past. So you're referencing books like this all the time, where it's just like, just get this book, read it, go do what they say, and you'll save yourself a lot of problems,
Totally. And there's probably only really like 5 books you need to read, and you kind of get 80-90% of the coverage that you need.
Can you name them?
Yeah, sure. So Traction /EOS by Gino Wickman. And then Vern Harnish, he has Scaling Up, obviously, which is great. I think Scaling Up, I think, makes more sense if you're a brand with a high amount of revenue per head. It's more complex, it's harder to implement, but it is very deep and very good. And there's lots of great tools. I would read both no matter what. I love both. They're also both books where you reread them. I've read each one at least 10 times. I always learn something new. It's really cool. And then I like Scaling Compensation by Vern Harnish as well. That one's the compensation philosophy one.
Yeah.
And then the other 2, this book on supply chain, I can't remember what it's called though. It's like some really weird book. I'll have to send it to you. But
yeah, okay.
The other 2 are, where'd it go? Hang on.
You mentioned Who.
Yes, Who. That's what I was thinking of. Who's the other really good one? And then it depends if you're running operations in-house or not. But there's a classic book written by, I think, Eli Goldratt. Hang on one second. Eli Goldratt, yes. The Goal by Eli Goldratt. I don't actually super love the book, because I think it's kind of, basically it's about implementing lean, if you're familiar with that, like
Yeah.
a philosophy behind manufacturing and just improving processes.
Yeah.
But it's written in a storybook type format where the guy's wife is going to divorce them unless he improves throughput at a production facility. So it's kind of funny. It's like
Yeah.
overly verbose. I'd rather have a textbook layout, but all of our
Yeah.
ops guys love that book, and does have good general knowledge. So
That's great.
yeah.
Man,
And there's also Ready Fire Aim. That's the other really good one by Michael Masterson. Have you read that?
No, so I'm just like not a business book reader, and I probably need to be. But again, as we talk about this, we're talking about all the reasons why I'm not building a large agency, because there's like a whole area of this where I'm like, it requires, like, what I understand is true is that there's a kind of careful thinking about this kind of thing that is required to do it well. And I'm like, maybe someday I will. Maybe it's because I have small kids and my brain is elsewhere at the moment the clock hits 5. Like, but I haven't done that. But when I talk to you, it reminds me every time that, like, there's a pathway to doing this if and when that day comes, and it's laid out. And the lesson in part to me is, like, take it really seriously, take the operational side of the business really, really seriously. Cause I've definitely seen this a lot where operators just like, they just don't have that mentality about their business, and they're not, and that can be fine. Like they're not trying to build that big of a thing. Like, and
or sometimes they have really good PMF that kind of covers up the lack of operating sophistication.
Totally.
Which we've seen a ton too. I'm sure you've seen it, right? Like where a brand goes from 0 to 50 million a year, but they're doing everything imaginable, totally incorrect, and they think they're good managers. But like being a good manager, I don't want to say it's unrelated to the end result of the company, but PMF can just carry you really far and hire a lot of sloppy things, right? Like I know a brand that was bootstrapped to 30, 40 million at like 20, 25% EBITDA in 3 years or something absurdly short. And everything you can think of is being done incorrectly on the marketing side, right? Like they're bidding heavily on brand phrases. When you go to the homepage, it's like not merchandised at all. It's crazy. It works, but it's just pure PMF, which is cool on the product side, but it could just be a better company, right? So why not do it?
And that's exactly it, is like, you just, why not like go and do the things that you need to do at that stage, or, hire an operations lead who will start to like come clean things up, even if you're not the person to do it. And I think that's part of the thing is sometimes the person who like develops the company that you just described is just like the wrong person to actually go implement all this stuff. And they just need a COO,
Totally.
And now it's hard to find that person if you don't know how to hire and all that stuff. But yeah. Okay. What like percentage wise, how much bottom line have you added to companies by doing these kinds of things? Because you're talking about cutting underperformers, offshoring, changing benefit structures significantly. I'm sure part of the thing you've seen is companies grow better and faster because everything works smoother. But I'm also just curious from a savings perspective, like how much have you seen like the impact be, or I guess really actually make it measurable however you want to. Like what have been the sort of really measurable results from implementing the kinds of things you've talked about in this episode?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to think of is if we're looking at people purely, like your cost of labor is a percentage of revenue. So that's been anywhere from kind of 4% of revenue all the way up to like 10% of revenue, depending on how bloated the company is, right? Sometimes you see a company gear up for a big increase in revenue, the revenue increase doesn't come. No, they're super bloated, right? So in that case, it's definitely chunkier. Like that's been even higher in the past. So yeah.
So you've saved, you're saying 4 to 10% of revenue in labor costs,
which is huge, right? Like it takes a pretty mediocre company to being a good company. Let's say they're meandering at like 3%, like 3% EBITDA or something. You can hopefully get them to closer to like 12, 10. 15. Yeah. So, and like you said, I think the actual main benefit is just a leaner, faster organization where everyone's happier to work. That's the really big thing. Like if you're not having fun day to day or excited to work with your team, I think there's a problem. Like obviously every business goes through a down cycle where it's not fun to work there just because, like, I don't know, maybe something happened, a competitor launched a product and just crushed you. But you should look forward to working with your team and you should be excited to work with them. I think that's the biggest thing for founders specifically.
It's really good. Mehtab, you are an incredible follow on X. You give away a lot of knowledge for free all the time. People people should do that now. They should go if they found this on X and they didn't follow you. I'm amazed, but if they don't, they should go follow you there at Mehtab Karda. The link for that is in the show notes. But the number one place you would say people should reach out to you if they want you to come and help with their company, which I'd recommend honestly for any company that that is open to any kind of outside help like this. That you would like if it was my company, I'm not blowing smoke. You would be my first call. And so go to cardaventures.com. The link for that is in the show notes as well. Tell people a little bit more about what to expect and maybe what kind of conversation they can start with you if they go to cardaventures.com and reach out.
Yeah, so we're super, super flexible, which I think is the number one people work with us is that flexibility and then operational value add. So preferably you have a few big projects you've been thinking of tackling and we can help you execute those projects with less of a miss. I think the math in your head that you should do is you could raise a $5 million VC round and end up on the VC treadmill. But of that 5 million, how much will you cost effectively deploy? Like you might only cost effectively deploy 10 to 20% of that. So let's say you deploy like, let's even be really generous here and say you deploy like 1 million or 2 million of that 5 million effectively. You've still incurred more net dilution than if you had raised less money from us and we help you execute those projects. Plus you're not on the treadmill and you will, in all likelihood, net far more personally. Like our number one, the first thing we do is we speak to a founder and we ask them, what's your actual goal? What are we optimizing for? And then we throw a few structures their way that would work for that goal.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely go follow up with Mehtab to go do that. Thanks, Mehtab. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Always fun.
All right, do follow up with Mehtab if you want to make your business better. One of the brightest minds in e-commerce. Go to cardaventures.com, reach out to him. He's really awesome. Great dude. Go check it out. And of course, if you want to follow up with me, you can do that at Andrew J. Ferris on X. You can email me at podcast@ajfgrowth.com or just go to ajfgrowth.com, check out everything I'm doing. There's all kinds of good stuff there. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you watched or listened to this. I promise you, if you liked this content, you will like a lot of my content. It is all very much in this range of stuff, helping make your business better, more profitable, grow, all those things. And do follow up also with my friends at More Staffing by going to morestaffing.co/AF. Virtual assistants can be helpful. Virtual professionals can change your business. You heard me make the case for it in this episode. You should go follow up with them. Thanks so much. I will see you next time.